javelin tape covering the basics of throwing technique and mechanics. The demonstrator on this is Matinari when he was, I believe, about 16 or 17 years old. They'll go through all the different phases of the throw in the teaching progression, starting with the grips, and then moving on from there, which is the first thing that they show here, is the various grips on the javelin, starting with the American grip, as it's called, the index finger and thumb, followed with the Finnish grip, as it's termed, which is the middle finger, index finger, and thumb, and then the fork grip, any of which is acceptable, and long throws have been achieved using each one of those grips. See is a demonstration of the standing throw. One of the things that you should really pay attention to is how the left side is set almost as an anchor, especially on the view from the front where you see from the left foot to the left shoulder, that line stays fairly straight and fairly solid, and then the right side whips around the throw. You'll also notice that there's not a really big effort in having a big arm throw. It's set the left side, let the right side accelerate around it at the intensity that the standing throw has. The arm doesn't overpower the rest of the body movement into the throw. Now we'll start to get some throws with some movement. First with just a step into the plant, and then with a small crossover. In all of these movements, once you get started, you see that the emphasis on the action of the hips and center of gravity is constantly forward. You don't see the hips and the center of gravity pause or slow down until the plant jolts them to a stop and it accelerates the upper body. When viewing these throws from the front, it's really helpful to watch and see where the left shoulder stays over the left foot, and they stabilize that left side, and then they pull against it. The next...
Siirretään paino oikealta vasemmalle jalalle, jolla ponnistetaan voimakkaasti kylki edellä eteenpäin. Ja heitto lähtee.
Next step in the progression is to go into actually walking through your approach and crossovers. Just relaxed at a walk at first, and then you may walk and actually take a bit of a jump into the crossover. But again, the focus is keeping the center of gravity moving forward while the shoulders and javelin stay relaxed and they react to the impact of the left. It's not a voluntary throw from the right side. It's a reaction to the suddenness of the left side, which whips the body around. Then we have running drills, just running and being comfortable carrying the javelin in a relaxed manner so it's not awkward. And then you would progress into crossovers, simply running sideways doing a crossover for repetition, and then you do the actual throwing crossover where you notice the difference in the rhythm where it's more of a simultaneous foot landing. That's very unnormal running rhythm. As we see the stride pattern for the throw, they teach either a 4-step or a 5-step pattern, which is essentially a double crossover, but one is a bit more pronounced. The 4-step, which you'll see first, they tend to bound a little bit more than with a 5-step pattern, which tends to run into it a little bit more, but there's always a noticeable preliminary kind of bound or crossover before the actual throwing crossover. Very typical of the Finnish technique, whether they're using the 4 or 5 stride pattern.
Lukumäärät ovat erilaiset.
One thing very typical of all the Finns is that their transition, as they withdraw the javelin and they're going from their regular cyclic rhythm of run into the throwing strides, they have a very dynamic, very jumpy transition that allows them to maintain this bounding, aggressive running style into their setup of the delivery of the javelin, so that this 2 strides prior to the throwing crossover is very athletic, very explosive, sets up big stretch reflexes in the legs and hips position that you see here, and then it's multiplied by the ability of the right leg to clear out of the way quickly so that there's no loss of speed coming into the plant, and that impact of the left really stretches the big muscle groups in the upper body and really accelerates that shoulder and arm into the delivery of the javelin. One thing very typical of all the Finns is that their transition, as they withdraw the javelin and they're going from their regular cyclic rhythm of run into the throwing strides, they have a very dynamic, very jumpy transition that allows them to maintain this bounding, aggressive running style into their setup of the delivery of the javelin, so that this 2 strides prior to the throwing crossover is very athletic, very explosive, sets up big stretch reflexes in the legs and hips to allow you to achieve this wonderful throwing position that you see here, and then it's multiplied by the ability of the right leg to clear out of the way quickly so that there's no loss of speed coming into the plant, and that impact of the left really stretches the big muscle groups in the upper body and really accelerates that shoulder and arm into the delivery of the javelin.
Tueksi.
See, in this 5-step pattern, the double crossover is not quite so pronounced. You move into it a little bit smoother, and there's really, you'll see great Finns throw with both styles. There's really not a preference. It's whatever you feel most comfortable with, but you notice as they come in with the 5-step throwing pattern, they still have that nice jumping transition, but this second crossover is much more pronounced. The throwing crossover is much more pronounced than the setup crossover that you see in the 4-step pattern. Now we're going to look at the entire throw, the entire competitive throw with the run-up, with special attention paid to a few significant parts of the throw. to a few significant parts of the throw. From a relaxed but athletic run-up, we come to the withdrawal and transition, where we put the javelin back into its position that it's going to be delivered from, and at the same time we switch to, from a relaxed but athletic run-up, we come to the withdrawal and transition, where we put the javelin back into its position that it's going to be delivered from, and at the same time we switch to the much more dynamic acyclical running pattern that they call this, what we term a transition, they call an impulse stride, which changes the rhythm, makes it much more dynamic and explosive as you're coming into the throwing crossover, as you see here, where the final left leg takeoff gets the body slightly backwardly inclined, the hips ahead of the chest, and then that quick left leg takeoff allows the left leg to get in front very quickly so that you can sink through the right, and that soft stepping action puts the body behind and low into the plant like a vaulter running into a vaulting pole, and then that firm left side is what you accelerate the throw around, and all the power goes out up into the javelin. The left side stays very firm and very solid, as you'll see here by Harri Hakarainen. As he comes into the throw, you'll notice, especially from this angle, how during the critical part of contorting the body, the left side stays very, very firm. The left shoulder has very little movement as the right side is being contorted and accelerated forward so that that energy is transferred into the javelin. It's a very important point that very few American throwers do consistently well, is to come in and essentially plant sideways and hold that left shoulder over the left foot as the right side is contorted and stretched and then finally comes forward into the delivery.